The soft glow of the autumn sunset filtered through the curtains, casting a warm hue across Sarah Mitchell's face as she stared at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Time seemed to stand still in their modest suburban home just outside Boston, where the maple trees were beginning to turn brilliant shades of red and gold. Her heart raced with a mixture of joy and disbelief as she heard the familiar sound of David's key in the front door. David Mitchell's tall frame appeared in the doorway, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the October wind. His blue eyes met hers, and in that instant, he knew something extraordinary had happened. Sarah's radiant smile told him everything before she could speak the words. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. David crossed the room in 3 long strides, enveloping her in his arms. The scent of his wool sweater mixed with his familiar cologne as Sarah pressed her face into his chest, their shared dream finally becoming reality. They had waited 3 years for this moment, through disappointments and false hopes, but now their patience had been rewarded. In the weeks that followed, their modest colonial home transformed into a sanctuary of anticipation. David spent weekends preparing the nursery, his architect's precision evident in every detail. Sarah would often find him late at night, poring over paint swatches and safety ratings for cribs, his dedication to creating the perfect space for their child touching her deeply. The first ultrasound became a milestone etched in their hearts forever. The steady rhythm of their baby's heartbeat filled the examination room, bringing both of them to tears. Dr. Amanda Chun, their experienced obstetrician, smiled warmly as she pointed out tiny hands and feet on the grainy black and white screen. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Chen assured them, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your baby is developing beautifully." That evening, they sat on their back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. David's hand rested protectively over Sarah's still flat stomach as they discussed names and shared their hopes for their child's future. "What about Benjamin for a boy?" David suggested, his voice soft with wonder. "After my grandfather?" Sarah leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Benjamin Mitchell." She tested the name on her tongue. "I love it. And for a girl?" "Grace," David said without hesitation, "because that's what she'd be to us." As winter melted into spring, Sarah's body changed with the seasons. Her morning sickness faded, replaced by an energy that seemed to radiate from within. She developed a habit of talking to the baby throughout the day, sharing her thoughts and dreams while she taught her 4th grade class at Lincoln Elementary. David became even more attentive, if that was possible. He would return from his architectural firm with special treats, organic strawberries in February, imported chocolates, and books on parenthood. Their evenings were spent reading these together, David's voice steady and sure as he absorbed every detail about what to expect. The first kick came during a quiet Sunday morning. Sarah had been grading papers at the kitchen table when she felt it, a definitive flutter that made her gasp. David rushed to her side, and they waited together, hands intertwined over her growing belly, until another kick rewarded their patience. "Hey there, little one," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't wait to meet you." Their dog, Max, a gentle golden retriever with soulful brown eyes, seemed to sense the impending change in their family dynamic. He began following Sarah everywhere, resting his head on her lap during quiet moments and positioning himself protectively nearby when visitors came to the house. His devotion touched them both, knowing their child would have a faithful guardian from the start. As Sarah entered her 3rd trimester, the summer heat brought new challenges. David installed additional air conditioning units and transformed their bedroom into a cool sanctuary. He would massage her swollen feet in the evenings, telling stories about his day at work while Sarah drifted in and out of comfortable drowsiness. Their baby shower, organized by Sarah's best friend Emma, turned their backyard into a celebration of new life. Friends and family gathered under white tents, sharing advice and stories while Sarah opened gifts. David stayed by her side, his proud smile never wavering as he helped her unwrap tiny clothes and essential baby items. The nursery came together piece by piece. Soft gray walls with white trim, a handcrafted wooden rocking chair that David's father had made, and a mobile of stars and moons that cast gentle shadows in the evening light. Sarah would often find herself standing in the doorway, imagining the moments they would share in this room. As her due date approached, Sarah and David attended birthing classes together at Massachusetts General Hospital. They practiced breathing techniques and discussed their birth plan, both committed to being as prepared as possible. David took meticulous notes, his architect's attention to detail extending to every aspect of their preparation for parenthood. The last ultrasound showed their baby in perfect position for delivery. Dr. Chun praised them for their dedication to following every recommendation, noting that Sarah's pregnancy had been textbook perfect. They left the appointment holding hands, stopping at their favorite cafe for one last peaceful lunch together before their lives would change forever. The first contractions began on a warm September evening. Sarah was folding baby clothes when she felt the initial tightening in her lower back. She breathed through it calmly, just as they had practiced, while David timed the contractions and packed their hospital bag into the car. The drive to the hospital was surreal, city lights blurring past their windows as David navigated through Boston's evening traffic. Sarah focused on her breathing, squeezing David's hand during contractions while he whispered words of encouragement. Everything was going according to plan until it wasn't. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine check of David's vitals. He had insisted on staying by Sarah's side throughout the early stages of labor, but the nurse noticed his color didn't look right. Within minutes, David collapsed, clutching his chest. The peaceful delivery room erupted into chaos. Medical staff rushed in, their urgent voices mixing with the steady beep of monitors. Sarah watched in horror as they began CPR on David, her own contractions intensifying with each passing moment. BP's dropping rapidly. "Get a crash cart in here." "Sir, can you hear me? Mr. Mitchell?" The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Sarah's labor progressed relentlessly while a separate medical team fought to save David's life. She could hear them working on him in the adjacent room, each sound a knife through her heart as she pushed through her own ordeal. Dr. Chen stayed with her, her calm presence an anchor in the storm. "Focus on your baby, Sarah," she urged gently. "David would want you to be strong right now." The baby crowned just as the sun began to rise, its first cry mixing with the sound of Sarah's sobs. A boy, Benjamin David Mitchell, 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfect new life. But David was gone, his heart having given out during the night, a previously undiagnosed condition taking him at the very moment his son entered the world. Sarah held her newborn son with trembling arms, his tiny features so like his father's already. Max's scrunched nose, the same determined set of his chin. Through her tears, she could see David in every detail of their child's face. The hospital room filled with oft morning light, but Sarah had never felt such darkness. Nurses moved quietly around her, their faces filled with sympathy as they checked vitals and helped her with initial feeding attempts. Her milk came in strong, her body continuing its biological imperative even as her heart shattered into a million pieces. Emma arrived first, her face streaked with tears as she hugged her friend. She took charge of calling family members and dealing with the immediate arrangements that needed to be made. Sarah was grateful for her friend's strength, unable to form coherent thoughts beyond the basic needs of her newborn son. The days that followed passed in a fog of grief and responsibility. Sarah went through the motions of caring for Ben, her body operating on pure instinct while her mind struggled to process the magnitude of her loss. The nursery they had prepared together became both a sanctuary and a torture chamber, every detail a reminder of David's loving attention. At night, when Ben slept in his carefully chosen crib, Sarah would curl up in the rocking chair, clutching one of David's sweaters to her chest. The wool still held his scent, a fact that both comforted and devastated her. Max would lie at her feet, his warm presence a silent comfort in the darkness. David's mother, Eleanor, arrived from Chicago as soon as she could make arrangements. Her own grief was evident in the new lines around her eyes, but she moved into the guest room without hesitation, determined to help her daughter-in-law navigate these impossible early days. Eleanor's presence was both a blessing and a cruel reminder. She shared David's blue eyes and gentle manner, traits that made Sarah's heart clench every time she caught glimpses of them. But she also brought a steady strength to the household, taking over cooking and cleaning while Sarah focused on Ben's needs. The funeral took place on a surprisingly warm autumn day. The same maple trees that had witnessed their joy now dropping golden leaves onto David's casket. Sarah stood at the graveside, Ben cradled against her chest, unable to process the finality of the moment. Friends and family surrounded them, their presence both supporting and suffocating. David's colleagues from the architectural firm attended in force, sharing stories of his dedication and creativity. Sarah listened numbly as they praised his latest designs, projects he would never see completed. Each anecdote was another reminder of the future they had lost. Returning home became an exercise in endurance. Every room held memories of David. His coffee mug still sitting on his desk, his sketchbook open to his last design, his shoes neatly lined up by the door. Sarah found herself avoiding certain spaces, creating new pathways through the house to minimize contact with these painful reminders. Ben's needs provided a relentless schedule that forced Sarah to keep moving forward. Feed, change, burp, sleep. The cycle continued regardless of her grief. Eleanor took night shifts when she could, but Sarah often insisted on handling them herself, using the quiet hours to talk to her son about his father. "Your daddy loved you so much," she would whisper, tracing Ben's tiny features in the dim nursery light. "He was so excited to meet you. He had so many plans." Max remained a constant presence, his devotion to both Sarah and Ben unwavering. He would position himself beneath the crib during naps, alert to every sound. During feeding sessions, he would rest his head on Sarah's knee, offering silent support through the long nights. The first pediatrician appointment was particularly difficult. Dr. Thompson's office was filled with happy families, their joy a stark contrast to Sarah's hollow existence. Eleanor accompanied them, handling the paperwork while Sarah focused on keeping Ben calm. "He's gaining weight beautifully," Dr. Thompson assured them, his kind eyes taking in Sarah's exhausted appearance. "You're doing a wonderful job, Mrs. Mitchell." The title felt wrong now, a reminder of everything she had lost. Sarah managed a weak smile, but the words echoed in her head long after they left the office. Mrs. Mitchell, a widow at 28, with a newborn son who would never know his father. As weeks passed, Sarah's grief began to take a darker turn. She went through the motions of caring for Ben, but emotionally she felt increasingly disconnected. The joy she had expected to feel as a new mother was overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of loss and guilt. Eleanor noticed the change, watching with growing concern as Sarah's responses to Ben became more mechanical. The loving coos and gentle touches were replaced by efficient, almost clinical care. During feeding times, Sarah would stare blankly at the wall instead of engaging with her son. "Sarah, sweetheart," Eleanor ventured one evening, after Ben had been put down for the night, "have you thought about talking to someone? A professional?" Sarah's response was automatic, defensive. "I'm fine. Ben's healthy. That's what matters." But she wasn't fine, and deep down, she knew it. The disconnect grew stronger with each passing day, a chasm widening between her and her son. Ben's features, so like David's, became painful to look at. His innocent smiles, rather than bringing joy, served as bitter reminders of everything they had lost. Max seemed to sense the growing tension in the house. The loyal dog began spending more time by Ben's side, often positioning himself between the baby and Sarah, as if protecting the child from his mother's emotional absence. His brown eyes would follow Sarah around the room, filled with a wisdom that seemed almost human. Eleanor's temporary stay extended into weeks, then months. She watched helplessly as Sarah retreated further into herself, going through the motions of motherhood while becoming increasingly detached from reality. The vibrant young teacher who had captured her son's heart was fading away, replaced by a ghost who merely existed. Ben thrived despite the emotional vacuum, thanks largely to Eleanor's loving attention and Max's constant guardianship. He began to show signs of his personality, David's determination, Sarah's quick smile, though she rarely saw it now. Eleanor would document these moments, hoping that someday Sarah would want to know about them. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. Eleanor's sudden illness, an aggressive form of pneumonia, sent her to the hospital, leaving Sarah alone with Ben for the first time since David's death. The responsibility she had been sharing suddenly fell entirely on her shoulders, and the weight proved too much to bear. One cold winter night, after hours of Ben's inconsolable crying, something in Sarah snapped. The walls of the house seemed to close in around her, every surface holding memories she couldn't escape. David's absence felt more acute than ever, and Ben's cries seemed to echo with accusation. In a moment of complete desperation, Sarah packed a small bag with Ben's essentials. Her movements were mechanical, driven by a darkness she couldn't name. Max watched from the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. The walk to the train station was surreal, streetlights casting long shadows on the empty sidewalks. Sarah moved as if in a trance, Ben bundled against her chest, unaware of his mother's internal turmoil. Max followed at a distance, his nails clicking on the concrete in a rhythm that matched Sarah's heartbeat. The station was deserted at this late hour, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Sarah stood at the edge of the platform, her mind clouded with grief and exhaustion. In her distorted thinking, she had convinced herself that Ben would be better off without her, that someone else could give him the love she seemed incapable of providing. Max's bark shattered the night's silence, startling Sarah from her dangerous thoughts. The sound was full, owed by running footsteps. Tom Harris, their neighbor, who had been walking his own dog and noticed the unusual activity at the station. "Sarah, is everything all right?" Tom's concerned voice cut through the fog in her mind. He approached carefully, taking in the scene with growing alarm. Max positioned himself between Sarah and the platform edge, his stance protective but non-threatening. His eyes never left Ben, even as Tom slowly made his way closer. The moment broke something loose in Sarah's chest. She sank to her knees, still clutching Ben, as sobs racked her body. Tom quickly moved to support her, while Max pressed against her side, offering warmth and stability. "Let me help," Tom said softly, already pulling out his phone to call for assistance. "You're not alone in this, Sarah." The next few hours passed in a blur of official procedures and concerned voices. Ben was temporarily placed with a foster family, the Hendersons, a warm couple with years of experience caring for children in crisis. Max, refusing to leave Ben's side, was allowed to go with them, his protective instincts recognized and respected by the social workers. Sarah was admitted to Riverside Psychiatric Center, where she began the long process of confronting her grief and depression. The facility's gentle approach and experienced staff helped her understand that her feelings, while overwhelming, were not uncommon for someone who had experienced such profound loss. Dr. Rachel Martinez, her assigned psychiatrist, helped Sarah navigate the complex layers of her trauma. Through their sessions, Sarah began to understand how the shock of losing David had triggered a severe depression, complicated by postpartum hormones and the enormous responsibility of single parenthood. "You haven't failed as a mother, Sarah," Dr. Martinez assured her during one particularly difficult session. "You're struggling with an impossible situation, and asking for help is an act of courage." The Hendersons proved to be a blessing beyond measure. They sent regular updates about Ben's progress, always including photos and stories about Max's continued devotion. The dog had appointed himself Ben's personal guardian, sleeping beneath his crib and alerting the Hendersons to any distress before it could escalate to crying. As weeks of treatment turned into months, Sarah slowly began to heal. The fog of depression lifted gradually, allowing her to process her grief in healthier ways. She started keeping a journal, writing letters to David about their son and her struggles. Each entry became a form of therapy, allowing her to pour out her heart to the man she had lost. Sometimes the words flowed easily, describing Ben's latest milestone or a memory that had surfaced unexpectedly. Other times, she could barely write through her tears, the pain of loss still sharp and raw. "Dear David," she wrote one evening, her hand trembling slightly. "Ben smiled today, really smiled, not just a reflex. The Hendersons sent a photo, and all I could see was you. He has your dimples, that same crinkle around his eyes. How do I deserve this second chance? How do I learn to be the mother he needs when every look at his face reminds me of everything we've lost?" The therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez helped Sarah understand that her love for Ben hadn't disappeared. It had merely been buried beneath layers of grief and trauma. Through cognitive behavioral therapy and grief counseling, she began to develop tools for managing her emotions and reconnecting with her maternal instincts. Grief isn't linear, Dr. Martinez would remind her during their sessions. There will be good days and bad days. The key is learning to navigate both while staying connected to the present moment. Sarah's progress was measured in small victories. She began looking forward to the updates from the Hendersons instead of dreading them. She started asking questions about Ben's daily routine, his preferences, his developing personality. The photos of Max's unwavering devotion brought both tears and smiles, the first real smile she had experienced since David's death. The Hendersons, John and Marie, proved to be exceptional temporary guardians. They understood the delicate balance between supporting Ben's immediate needs and maintaining his connection to Sarah. They created a small photo album that they updated weekly, documenting not just milestones but everyday moments. Ben's first attempt at solid food, his fascination with Max's wagging tail, his peaceful sleeping face. Max's role in Ben's life continued to amaze everyone involved. The dog seemed to understand intuitively what Ben needed at any given moment. When Ben was learning to crawl, Max would position himself just out of reach, encouraging the baby to move forward. During nap times, he would alert the Hendersons to any changes in Ben's breathing or comfort level. His dedication became a source of comfort for Sarah, knowing that even in her absence, Ben had such a faithful protector. As part of her therapy, Sarah began taking short supervised visits with Ben at the Hendersons' home. The first visit was overwhelming. Seeing how much he had grown, hearing his baby giggles, watching him interact with Max. She sat in their sunny living room, tears streaming down her face as Ben played on his activity mat, Max never more than a few feet away. "He's doing so well," Marie assured her, offering a tissue and a gentle squeeze of her hand. "And he knows you're his mama. We make sure to show him your picture every day." These visits became the highlight of Sarah's week, each one a little longer, a little easier than the last. She began to participate more actively in Ben's care during these times, feeding him, changing him, reading to him from the books David had chosen so carefully during the pregnancy. Max would watch these interactions attentively, his tail wagging whenever Sarah showed signs of confident mothering. Dr. Martinez helped Sarah process each visit, working through the complex emotions that surfaced. "You're rebuilding your relationship with Ben," she explained. "It's okay to take it slowly. What matters is that you're moving forward." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of these visits. Ben was fussy, refusing his bottle and squirming in Marie's arms. Without thinking, Sarah began humming the same lullaby she had sung to him during her pregnancy. Ben immediately turned toward her voice, his eyes wide and searching. When Marie carefully transferred him to Sarah's arms, he settled almost instantly, his tiny hand gripping her finger as he drifted off to sleep. That moment changed everything. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a light breaking through the darkness. She held her sleeping son, breathing in his baby scent, and for the first time since David's death, she felt like a mother. Max, sensing the significance of the moment, rested his head on her knee, his eyes full of understanding. The journal entries began to reflect this change. "David," she wrote that night, back in her room at Riverside, "I felt you with us today. When Ben fell asleep in my arms, it was like you were there, wrapping us both in your love. I'm starting to understand that loving him doesn't mean forgetting you. It means carrying your love forward through him." Sarah's recovery gained momentum after that day. She worked diligently with Dr. Martinez on developing coping strategies for the difficult moments that still came. They created a detailed plan for her eventual return home, including a support network of friends, family, and mental health professionals who would help her transition back to full-time motherhood. The Hendersons remained an integral part of this support system, offering to help with childcare and promising to stay involved in Ben's life. Their experience with foster children had taught them the importance of maintaining connections, and Hay understood that Ben would benefit from having additional loving adults in his life. Max's unwavering devotion continued to touch everyone involved in Ben's care. The dog had become more than just a pet. He was a bridge between Sarah's past and future, a living reminder of the love that had created their family. His presence helped Sarah feel connected to David while building new bonds with their son. As Sarah's release date approached, she spent more time preparing for the responsibility of caring for Ben full-time. She worked with a parent counselor at Riverside, practicing daily routines and learning to recognize her own triggers. The journal became a place to process her fears as well as her hopes. "I'm scared, David," she wrote one evening. "Scared of failing, scared of not being enough. But then I think about how you always believed in me, how you would want me to be strong for our son. Max watches over him just like you would have, and somehow that makes me feel braver. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Different than we planned, but okay." The day Sarah returned home, she found the house transformed. Emma and Eleanor, now recovered, had worked together to pack away some of David's things while keeping others thoughtfully displayed. They had created a balance between honoring his memory and making space for new beginnings. The nursery remained largely as David had designed it, but with subtle updates. New photos lined the walls. Pictures of Ben with the Hendersons, with Max, and most recently with Sarah. The room told the story of their journey, acknowledging both the pain and the healing that had brought them to this point. Ben's transition home was gradual, with the Hendersons helping to maintain his routine while Sarah settled back in. Max resumed his protective duties seamlessly, now dividing his attention between mother and child with remarkable intuition. He seemed to understand when Sarah needed extra support, pressing close during difficult moments or directing her attention to Ben when she started to withdraw. The first night alone with Ben was both terrifying and triumphant. Sarah moved through the bedtime routine they had practiced: bath, story, lullaby, with Max as her faithful assistant. When Ben finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat in the rocking chair David had loved, watching her son's peaceful face in the soft glow of the night light. "We did it, David," she whispered into the quiet room. "Not perfectly, but we did it." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, his steady presence a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. The dog had become a symbol of resilience, of love that adapts and grows even through the darkest times. His dedication to both Sarah and Ben had helped forge a path through grief toward healing. As weeks turned into months, Sarah and Ben developed their own rhythm. There were still difficult days, moments when grief would wash over her unexpectedly, or when the responsibility of single parenthood felt overwhelming. But she had learned to reach out for help when she needed it, to lean on the support system she had built. The Hendersons remained close, becoming honorary grandparents to Ben. They hosted regular Sunday dinners, creating new traditions that honored both the past and the present. These gatherings became a testament to the family they had all become, not through blood, but through love and shared experience. Max continued to be the thread that tied their story together. He was there for Ben's first steps, staying close enough to steady the wobbly toddler, but far enough away to let him gain confidence. He watched over nap time, played gentle games of fetch, and seemed to understand instinctively when either Sarah or Ben needed extra comfort. Sarah's journal evolved from a place of grief to a chronicle of their new life. She still wrote to David, sharing their son's achievements and her own growth, but the entries became more hopeful, more focused on the future while honoring the past. "Ben said dog today," she wrote one evening. It was his first real word, and of course it was for Max. "You would have loved seeing them together, David. Max is teaching our son about unconditional love, just like you taught me. Sometimes I see you in the way Ben tilts his head when he's thinking, or in the way he reaches for Max when he's unsure. You're still here with us, in all the ways that matter most."